On June 14, 1962, at 9:47 p.m., a woman's hand was trembling on a garden patio behind a mansion in Beverly Hills, California. The tremor was not violent. It was not the kind of shaking that draws attention from across a room or causes a stranger to ask if something is wrong. It was the kind that lives in the fingertips, a vibration of approximately 2 cycles per second, barely perceptible, visible only to someone standing within 3 feet and paying attention to nothing else. No one at the party inside the house was standing within 3 feet of her. No one at the party inside the house was paying attention to her at all. She had been outside for 11 minutes. She had not moved from the spot where she stopped walking. She had not taken a sip from the glass in her hand. She had not turned around to look at the French doors behind her. She was standing at the edge of a patio that belonged to a man she did not like, at a party she did not want to attend, in a dress that someone else had chosen for her, holding a glass of champagne that someone else had placed in her hand. Her name was Marilyn Monroe. She was 36 years old, 5 feet 5 inches tall, approximately 118 pounds. Her measurements, because the world had always measured her, were 35, 22, 35. She wore a white halter dress with a plunging neckline designed by Gershwin, the costumier who had dressed her for 3 films and who understood that the dress was never the statement. The body inside it was the statement. The dress was merely the frame. The dress was valued at approximately $1,200. Her shoes were white satin heels, 3 inches, size 7, with a thin ankle strap that caught the light from the floating candles in the reflecting pool 6 feet to her left. Her hair was platinum blonde, set and styled 14 hours earlier by her personal hairdresser at her home on Fifth Helena Drive in Brentwood, a 12-room Spanish colonial. She had purchased 4 months earlier for $75,000, the first home she had ever owned in her own name. She was holding a champagne glass in her left hand. The champagne was Moët and Chandon, 1955 vintage, poured by a waiter in a white jacket at 9:25 p.m. The glass was a coupe, not a flute, approximately 6 ounces when full, now still full because she had not brought it to her lips. The surface of the champagne was not still. It vibrated in concentric rings, each ring expanding approximately 1/4 inch before dissolving into the next, a seismograph recording the tremor in her fingers. She was not cold. The temperature was 64 degrees Fahrenheit. She was not drunk. The glass was untouched. She was afraid. 8 feet behind her, sitting on a stone bench beside a hedge of Italian cypress that had been planted in 1941 and trimmed to a height of exactly 7 feet, a man was watching her hand, not her face, not her dress, not her body, not the ankle strap catching candlelight, not the platinum hair that had launched 1,000 magazine covers, her hand. He had been watching it for approximately 90 seconds. He had not spoken. He had not shifted his weight on the bench. He had not cleared his throat, or adjusted his posture, or done any of the things a person does when they want another person to know they are present. He was sitting with his palms resting on his knees, fingers relaxed but not limp, back straight but not rigid, breathing through his nose at a rate of approximately 4 breaths per minute, which is roughly 1/3 the breathing rate of an average adult at rest. His heart rate was 56 beats per minute. His body fat was approximately 4%. His forearms measured 11.5 inches in circumference. His weight was 135 pounds. His name was Bruce Lee. He was 21 years old. Bruce Lee was at this party because a stunt coordinator named Tom had told him there would be television producers in attendance who might be interested in casting a Chinese martial artist for an upcoming series. The series would not materialize for another 4 years. Bruce Lee did not know this yet. He arrived at the mansion at 8:15 p.m. in a dark navy cotton shirt, with the sleeves rolled once to the mid-forearm, black cotton trousers, and flat-soled shoes with a rubber sole, 3/16 of an inch thick, that made no sound on any surface. He had walked on that evening. He had spoken to 4 people. The first was Tom, who introduced him to a man named David, who worked in casting at Warner Brothers. David shook Bruce Lee's hand, looked at his frame, and said, "You are smaller than I expected." Bruce Lee said, "I usually am." The third person was a woman in a red dress, who asked him if he was an actor. He said, "No, I am the reason actors look convincing when they fight." The fourth was a bartender from whom he ordered 2 glasses of water, both room temperature, because cold water constricts the throat, and he never voluntarily constricted anything in his body. He had eaten nothing. He had been inside the house for 1 hour and 21 minutes. He came outside at 9:36 p.m. because the noise level inside the main room was averaging 71 decibels, which is roughly equivalent to the sustained volume of a vacuum cleaner, and Bruce Lee preferred environments below 55 decibels, because above that threshold his ability to hear subtle sounds, the shift of a foot on carpet, the intake of breath before someone speaks, the change in cadence when a person's heartbeat accelerates, was compromised. He walked through the French doors onto the patio. He chose the east bench because it was in shadow, because it faced the doors so he could see anyone approaching, and because the Italian cypress hedge behind it blocked the wind and created a pocket of stillness in an otherwise restless evening. At 9:36 p.m., the same minute Bruce Lee walked through the French doors onto the patio, Marilyn Monroe walked through those same doors from the opposite side of the living room. She did not know he was already there. She did not look at the east bench where he was sitting. She walked directly to the low stucco wall on the west side of the patio, 32 inches tall, topped with a rough plaster cap that had been painted white and repainted so many times the surface had the texture of dried salt. She stood with her back to the party, facing the garden, holding the champagne glass she had accepted 22 minutes earlier from a waiter who had called her Miss Monroe, with the particular emphasis that strangers use when they want you to know they know who you are. The patio was 40 feet by 28 feet. Saltillo tile in a running bond pattern, each tile approximately 12 inches square, terracotta-colored, sealed with a matte finish that had been reapplied in March of that year. A rectangular reflecting pool sat in the center of the patio, 12 feet long, 4 feet wide, 8 inches deep, lined with dark blue mosaic tile, and filled with water that was 61 degrees. 3 floating candles sat on the surface, each in a small ceramic dish, each flame approximately 1 inch tall, each casting a circle of warm light, roughly 18 inches in diameter, that moved when the Santa Ana wind pushed the water. A wrought iron pergola stood over the west half of the patio, covered approximately 60% with magenta bougainvillea that had been flowering since late April. 2 stone benches faced each other across the reflecting pool, east and west, each bench 42 inches long, 18 inches deep, made of poured concrete with a sandstone veneer that retained the heat of the afternoon sun for approximately 3 hours after sunset. By 9:47 p.m., the benches were cool. The mansion was located on the 1100 block of Carolwood Drive in Beverly Hills, one of 3 neighborhoods that together form the area known as the Platinum Triangle of Los Angeles. Built in 1937 by an architect whose name appeared on 14 other houses in the neighborhood. Spanish colonial revival. 9,200 square feet, 6 bedrooms, 7 bathrooms, a screening room with 16 leather seats, a wine cellar holding approximately 800 bottles, and a kitchen large enough to serve 120 guests. Tonight it was serving 74, approximately 48 men and 26 women. The men were studio executives in dark suits that cost between $300 and $500, agents whose watches cost more than the suits, directors who dressed deliberately worse than both, 2 actors whose names were currently on marquees along Hollywood Boulevard, and a handful of men whose specific occupations no one at the party could name but whose presence everyone acknowledged with the particular deference reserved for people who control things that are never discussed openly. The women were actresses between projects, models between covers, wives who smiled on schedule, and 3 women who had arrived alone and would leave alone and whose names would not appear in any society column the following morning. The music was live. A string quartet positioned in the southwest corner of the living room played Gershwin, currently Embraceable You, tempo approximately 76 beats per minute, audible through the open French doors at roughly 55 decibels on the patio. The sky was clear, no moon. The only light on the patio came from the 3 floating candles, a single wrought iron sconce mounted on the east wall of the house, with a 40-watt bulb behind amber glass, and the warm glow spilling through the French doors from the crystal chandelier inside the living room. Bruce Lee watched the tremor in Marilyn Monroe's hand travel from her fingertips to her wrist. He tracked its progression the way he tracked the progression of any involuntary movement, with clinical precision and without judgment. The champagne inside the glass created the concentric ripples he had been observing for 90 seconds. Each ring expanded 1/4 inch before dissolving. The frequency was consistent, which meant the tremor was not worsening yet, but the amplitude was increasing, which meant it was migrating. He calculated the progression. It had started in her fingers. It was now in her wrist. If it reached her forearm within the next 60 seconds, it would continue to her shoulder. If it reached her shoulder, her jaw would tighten, because the trapezius muscle connects the shoulder to the base of the skull, and when the trapezius contracts involuntarily, The masseter muscle in the jaw contracts in sympathy. If her jaw tightened, her breathing pattern would shift from whatever shallow rhythm she was currently maintaining to an even shallower thoracic pattern, chest only, no diaphragm engagement, approximately 18 to 20 breaths per minute, each breath moving roughly 300 milliliters of air instead of the 500 milliliters that a relaxed diaphragmatic breath produces. If her breathing shifted to chest only, her blood oxygen saturation would decrease slightly, her carbon dioxide levels would rise, and her heart rate would climb from its current estimated 88 beats per minute to above 100. Above 100 beats per minute at rest, the human body enters a mild state of sympathetic activation. The hands sweat, the pupils dilate, the visual field narrows, the brain begins prioritizing threat detection over rational analysis. The body interprets the elevated heart rate not as a consequence of shallow breathing, but as confirmation that the threat it already suspects is real. The decision to go back inside, to open the French doors, to walk into a room full of 74 people who expected a specific version of Marilyn Monroe, would become harder with every second after that threshold was crossed. Bruce Lee had approximately 60 seconds before the tremor reached her shoulder. He could have remained silent. He had no obligation to speak. The woman at the wall was a stranger. Her tremor was her own. Her fear was her own. The party inside was not his problem. The distance between the east bench and the stucco wall was 8 feet, which in social terms at a Beverly Hills party between two people who had never met, was a distance that permitted silence indefinitely. But Bruce Lee had spent his entire life studying the human body, not just in combat but in stillness. And he recognized what was happening to the woman at the wall. He recognized it because he had seen it in students who stood in front of a heavy bag for the first time. He had seen it in sparring partners who faced him and realized in the first half-second that their assumptions about his size were catastrophically wrong. He had seen it in himself, once at the age of 13, standing backstage before a cha-cha competition in Hong Kong, his hands vibrating at exactly the frequency Marilyn Monroe's hands were vibrating now. He knew what the tremor meant, and he knew that the tremor had a clock. He said 5 words. "The glass is not heavy." Marilyn turned. The motion took approximately half a second, the kind of turn a person makes when a sound arrives from a direction they believed was empty. She saw him for the first time. She did not recognize him. Her eyes moved in the sequence that Bruce Lee had observed in hundreds of people meeting him for the first time. She looked at his shoes first. Flat, black, no visible brand, no heel. Then his hands, resting on his knees, palms down, fingers relaxed. Then his face. His expression was neutral. His eyes were not on her face, not on her dress, not on her body. They were on her hand, the hand that had been holding the glass, the hand that was now pressed against her thigh, still trembling. She said, "Excuse me?" He said, "Your champagne glass weighs approximately 6 ounces. You are holding it as if it weighs 6 pounds. That is not the glass. That is your hand." She looked at the glass sitting on the stucco wall where she had placed it. She looked at her right hand pressed against her thigh. She could feel the vibration transferring through the fabric of her dress into the muscle of her quadricep. She pressed harder. The tremor did not stop. Pressing a trembling hand against a surface does not stop the tremor. It transfers the vibration into a larger muscle group where it becomes less visible, but no less present. Bruce Lee knew this. She did not. She said, "I am just cold." Bruce Lee said, "It is 64 degrees. You were not cold when you walked out here 11 minutes ago. You became cold after you decided not to go back in." She stared at him. 3 seconds of silence. The floating candles shifted on the surface of the reflecting pool. A gust of Santa Ana wind moved the bougainvillea above the pergola by approximately 2 inches. Inside the house, someone laughed loudly enough to reach the patio at 40 decibels. 3 seconds is not a long time in a conversation. It is a long time when a stranger has just described the interior of your body more accurately than your own physician has in a decade. She ran the calculation she ran with every man she met for the first time. What does this man want from me? What will he take if I let him close enough? What will he tell a journalist tomorrow morning? She had been running this calculation since she was 19 years old. She could complete it in approximately 4 seconds. She completed it in 3 because the variables were unusual. His eyes had not moved below her chin. His posture had not shifted toward her. His voice carried no flattery, no warmth designed to disarm, no request disguised as concern. It carried precision. The same precision she heard from her doctors, except her doctors looked at charts when they spoke, and this man looked at her hand. She said, "You have been watching me." He said, "I have been watching your hand. The rest of you is performing. Your hand is not." Marilyn Monroe looked at the French doors. Through the glass she could see the party continuing without her. A waiter in a white jacket carried a silver tray of champagne coupes through the living room, navigating between clusters of guests with the practiced geometry of a man who had done this 400 times and understood that the shortest path between 2 points in a crowded room is never a straight line. A woman in a green silk dress laughed with her head tilted back at exactly the angle that photographers prefer, approximately 15 degrees past vertical, because that angle elongates the neck and catches light along the jawline, and suggests a joy so overwhelming that the body cannot contain it upright. A man in a grey suit leaned toward a younger woman and said something close to her ear that made her smile in a way that did not reach her eyes. The smile engaged the zygomatic major muscle, which pulls the corners of the mouth upward, but did not engage the orbicularis oculi muscle, which crinkles the corners of the eyes. Bruce Lee could identify the difference from 40 feet. Marilyn Monroe could identify it from any distance at all, because she had been producing that exact smile since she was 19 years old, and she knew the cost of it better than anyone in that house. The quartet inside shifted from embraceable you to someone to watch over me. Tempo approximately 72 beats per minute. The melody came through the French doors and settled on the patio like a temperature change, something felt before it was identified. She could see the room could not see her. The contrast between the brightly lit interior and the dark patio had turned the French doors into a one-way mirror. She was watching the party the way an audience watches a film from the back row of a theater, seeing the performance clearly, understanding its construction, recognizing every gesture and every angle and every calculated laugh without being required to participate. For 11 minutes she had been an audience. Going back inside meant becoming the screen again. She walked to the west bench. She did not hurry. She did not look at Bruce Lee as she walked. She sat down on the stone bench across from him, approximately 6 feet of saltillo tile and the rectangular reflecting pool between them. The 3 floating candles were to her left, their flames approximately 3/4 of an inch tall now, each one having burned down slightly since she first came outside. The candle flames cast slow-moving circles of warm light onto the underside of the bougainvillea and onto the left side of her face. The right side of her face was in shadow. She looked, from Bruce Lee's perspective on the east bench, like a photograph that had been developed only halfway. She said, "Who are you?" He said, "My name is Bruce Lee. I teach martial arts." She said, "You are a fighter." He said, "I am a teacher. Fighting is what happens when teaching fails." She studied him the way she studied every man she met for the first time at a gathering like this. She was not studying his face or his body or his clothes. She was studying his function. What is his role? What does he control? What can he give? And what can he take? Every person at a party in Beverly Hills in 1962 performed a function, and understanding that function within the first 30 seconds of an encounter was the difference between a conversation you chose and a conversation that was chosen for you. This man did not fit any function she recognized. He was not an executive. His shirt was cotton, not silk. He was not an agent. His watch, if he wore one, was not visible, and agents in Beverly Hills wore watches the way generals wore medals. He was not a director. Directors at parties leaned against walls and studied rooms with a detachment that suggested they were composing a shot, and this man was not leaning against anything. He was sitting upright with a stillness that did not suggest composition but completion, as though every bone in his body was exactly where it had decided to be. She said, "What do you want?" Bruce Lee said, "To know why you are afraid of a room you could own." The sentence landed between them and stayed there the way a stone lands in water and stays on the bottom while the ripples move outward and disappear. She did not answer it immediately. Not because she did not have an answer. She had several answers. She had the answer she gave journalists, which involved smiling and saying she loved her fans and felt grateful every day. She had the answer she gave her psychiatrist, which involved clinical language about anxiety and the therapeutic process. She had the answer she gave herself at 3 a.m, when the Nembutal had worn off and the house on 5th Helena Drive was silent, and the only sound was her own breathing and the refrigerator, cycling on and off every 45 minutes. None of those answers were the answer to his question, because his question had not asked about fear in general. It had asked about this specific fear, at this specific party, on this specific night. Why you're afraid of a room you could own. Not why you're afraid. Why you're afraid of this room. A room that by every measurable standard, fame, beauty, cultural power, commercial value, she dominated more completely than any other person inside it. She said, "Every room I walk into, they want something from me." He said, "What do they want?" She said, "The version of me they invented, the one that smiles and breathes through her mouth and tilts her head and makes every man feel like he is the only man in the room. That version does not exist, but she is the one they paid for. She is the one on the poster and the screen and the magazine cover. And every time I open a door, they are not looking at me. They are looking for her, and I have to produce her every single time. I have to manufacture her from nothing, from the inside out, starting with the breath, and then the posture, and then the voice, and then the eyes. And by the time she is fully assembled, I am gone. I am standing inside her like a person standing inside a costume, and the costume is smiling, and the person inside is not." Bruce Lee did not respond immediately. He was quiet for approximately 7 seconds. 7 seconds is a long silence in any conversation. In a conversation between two strangers on a patio at a Beverly Hills party at 9:53 p.m., it is an eternity. Most people fill 7 seconds of silence with sound because silence between strangers creates a vacuum, and the human instinct is to fill vacuums with words. Any words, even wrong words, because wrong words feel safer than no words. Bruce Lee did not fill the silence. He sat in it. He let it occupy the 6 feet of tile between them, the same way the candlelight occupied the underside of the bougainvillea, without force, without request, without apology. Then he said, "I understand. I am 135 pounds. Every room I walk into, they look at me and see a small man. They see a body that is not large enough to be dangerous. They see a Chinese man in a country that does not believe Chinese men can fight. They see 5 feet 7 inches of a race they have already decided is passive and quiet, and good at laundry and mathematics and nothing else. I have to prove them wrong every time I open a door, every single time. Before I can teach, before I can demonstrate, before I can be heard, I have to overcome the version of me they have already built in their heads. You have to produce the version they expect. I have to destroy the version they expect." We have the same problem from opposite directions. Marilyn looked at him differently after that. The calculation she had been running since the first 5 words he spoke, the calculation that sorted every man into threat categories, shifted. He did not move into the category marked safe. He did not move into the category marked harmless. He moved into a category she had never used before because she had never encountered a man who fit it. The category had no name. The closest word she could find for it was parallel. He was not a man who wanted something from her. He was not a man who wanted to protect her or save her or fix her, which in her experience was just another form of wanting something from her. He was a man who recognized something in her because he carried the same thing in a different body. He was a stranger who was not strange because the shape of his isolation matched the shape of hers. She said, "How do you walk into those rooms?" He said, "I breathe." She said, "That is it?" He said, "That is everything." She waited for him to say more. He did not say more. He sat on the stone bench with his palms on his knees and his back straight and his eyes on hers, not on her lips, not on the plunging neckline of the John Louis dress, not on the ankle strap catching candlelight, on her eyes, and his expression contained no urgency, no persuasion, no performance. He had given her the answer. The answer was one word. Whether she accepted it or dismissed it or laughed at it was entirely her decision. And his face made clear that any of those responses would be equally acceptable to him, because his sense of himself did not depend on her response. That was the thing she recognized. That was the parallel. He did not need her to validate his answer the way she did not need the room inside to validate her existence. They were both standing outside a version of themselves that the world had built, and they were both tired. She did not laugh. She did not dismiss it. She said, "Show me." Bruce Lee stood up from the east bench. The motion was unhurried. He did not push off with his hands. He did not shift his weight forward and use momentum. He simply stood, the way a tree does not decide to be upright but simply is upright, as though sitting and standing were the same state expressed at different altitudes. He walked to the center of the patio, between the 2 benches, beside the reflecting pool. His flat-soled shoes made no sound on the saltillo tile. The 3 floating candles were at his knees. The bougainvillea was above his head. He stood in the space between fire and flowers and said, "Stand up." Marilyn stood. The motion was different from his. She pressed her palms against the stone bench and pushed. She shifted her weight forward, onto the 3-inch heels. She straightened her knees. She adjusted her dress at the hip with her left hand, a gesture so automatic she did not register it, the way a person blinks without registering the blink. She was now standing approximately 4 feet from Bruce Lee. The reflecting pool was between them. To her left, to his right. He looked at her breathing. He did not ask her to describe it. He observed it. Her chest rose and fell at a rate of approximately 16 breaths per minute. Each inhale was shallow, approximately 300 milliliters of air, which is 60% of a normal relaxed breath. Her shoulders rose slightly with each inhale, approximately 1/4 inch. Her diaphragm was not engaging. The breathing was entirely thoracic, meaning the intercostal muscles between her ribs were doing all the work while the diaphragm, the large dome-shaped muscle at the base of the lungs, that is responsible for 70 to 80% of respiratory effort in a relaxed person, sat idle. This was fear breathing. The body takes air in short sips because deep breathing requires the diaphragm to descend, which requires the abdominal muscles to relax, which requires the body to believe, at a neurological level below conscious thought, that it is safe. Marilyn Monroe's body did not believe it was safe. It had not believed it was safe for a very long time. Bruce Lee said, "Breathe in through your nose for 4 seconds. Count them." She breathed in. 1, 2, 3, 4. The inhale was shallow at first, the first 2 seconds moving air only into the upper chest. But on the 3rd second, something shifted. The diaphragm engaged, not fully, but partially, the way a muscle engages when it has been dormant and receives a signal it almost does not recognize. On the 4th second, her lungs expanded to approximately 70% of capacity. Her shoulders rose by 1/4 inch, less than usual because the diaphragm was sharing the work. He said, "Hold for 2 seconds." She held. 1, 2. The hold is the pivot point. During the hold, the body experiences a brief suspension of the respiratory cycle that the autonomic nervous system interprets as a deliberate act of control. The body did not choose to stop breathing because of danger. The mind chose to stop breathing because it decided to. This distinction between involuntary cessation and voluntary cessation is the neurological equivalent of the difference between being pushed off a ledge and standing on the edge by choice. Both involve the same ledge, only one involves terror. He said, "Out through your mouth for 7 seconds, slowly, as if you are blowing on a candle you do not want to extinguish." She exhaled. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The exhale was the longest continuous breath she had taken in hours, perhaps days. The air left her mouth in a steady, controlled stream that she directed, at an imaginary point, approximately 18 inches in front of her face. On the 2nd second of the exhale, her shoulders began to drop. On the 4th second, her jaw unclenched. On the 6th second, the muscles around her eyes softened, the orbicularis oculi releasing tension she did not know it was holding. On the 7th second, her hands, which had been at her sides with fingers curled slightly inward, opened. The fingers extended. The tremor was gone. Total elapsed time, 13 seconds. Bruce Lee said, "Again." She breathed in. 4 seconds. Hold. 2 seconds. Out. 7 seconds. The second cycle was smoother. The diaphragm engaged on the 1st second instead of the 3rd. The hold felt less like suspension and more like a pause between 2 sentences. The exhale was steadier, the stream of air more even, the release of tension more complete. He said, "One more." She breathed in. 4 seconds. Hold. 2 seconds. Out. 7 seconds. On the 3rd cycle, something changed that Bruce Lee had been waiting for. Her weight shifted. Throughout the entire encounter, from the moment she walked onto the patio to the moment she stood up from the west bench, Marilyn Monroe's weight had been evenly distributed between both feet, which in body language terms indicates a person who has not decided whether to advance or retreat. On the 7th second of the 3rd exhale, her weight shifted forward onto the balls of her feet. Her heels did not leave the ground, but the pressure on them decreased by approximately 40%. Her center of gravity moved forward by roughly 1 inch. Her posture changed. Her shoulders, which had been slightly forward for the entire evening, approximately 1 inch ahead of where they would sit if she were standing at attention, dropped back to a neutral position. Her chin, which had been level, but with her eyes cast downward at roughly 15 degrees, lifted. Not dramatically, not like a model on a runway or an actress hitting her mark, by approximately 3 degrees, just enough that her eye line moved from the tile at Bruce Lee's feet to his face. She was not the same woman who had walked onto this patio 11 minutes ago. She was not a different woman either. She was the same woman with less weight on her. Not physical weight, the weight of the room she had been carrying since 9:25 p.m. when a waiter handed her a glass of champagne and called her Miss Monroe, and the performance clock started. Bruce Lee watched the transformation the way he watched every transformation, without celebration, without commentary, with the quiet satisfaction of a man who has seen a principle proven for the 1,000th time and still finds the proof interesting. He said, "The inhale activates the sympathetic nervous system. That is the system that prepares you to fight or to run. It elevates your heart rate, it constricts your blood vessels, it tells your body that something is coming. The exhale activates the parasympathetic nervous system. That is the system that tells your body the threat has passed. It slows the heart rate, it relaxes the blood vessels. It tells every muscle in your body that it is permitted to stand down." He paused. The floating candles flickered. The quartet inside had stopped playing. In the silence between songs, the party noise became individually audible. A woman's laugh, a glass touching a glass, a man's voice saying a name that neither Bruce Lee nor Marilyn Monroe recognized. He continued, "When the exhale is longer than the inhale, you are giving your body more safety than danger. 4 seconds of activation, 7 seconds of deactivation. The body receives almost twice as much calm as fear in every cycle. 13 seconds. Do this once before you open any door. Your body will enter the room before your fear does. Your body will send a signal to every person in that room that something has arrived, and because they cannot identify what it is, because it is not the smile or the voice or the tilt of the head they are expecting, they will not know how to react to it. And that is the advantage. When a room full of people who expect a performance encounters presence instead, the room loses its script. You become unpredictable. And unpredictable is the only thing a room full of powerful men cannot control." Marilyn said, "I feel different." Bruce Lee said, "You are different. Fear lives in the inhale. Calm lives in the exhale. You just gave your body more calm than fear for the first time tonight, perhaps for the first time in longer than tonight." She looked at her hands, both of them. She held them out in front of her at waist height, palms down, fingers extended. The floating candle light caught them from below. They were steady, no tremor, no vibration, no concentric rings in a champagne glass. She turned them over, palms up. She studied them as if she was seeing them for the first time, as if the hands that had trembled against a champagne glass 4 minutes ago and the hands she was looking at now belonged to 2 different women, and she was trying to reconcile how both could exist in the same body. She said, 13 seconds. He said, 13 seconds. She said, "I have spent years with doctors, psychiatrists, prescriptions, pills that cost me hundreds of dollars a month and turn the world into cotton and make me sleep for 14 hours and wake up feeling like I have not rested at all. I have spent years sitting in offices describing my fear to men with diplomas on the wall who write notes on yellow pads and nod and say, 'Tell me more about that,' and charge me $40 an hour to listen to something they have no intention of fixing because fixing it would end the appointments." Bruce Lee said nothing. He let her speak. This was a skill he had learned not from martial arts, but from teaching martial arts. A student who is articulating their own problem is closer to solving it than a student who is listening to someone else articulate it for them. His job in this moment was the same as his job in the Kwoon. Be present. Be quiet. Let the student find the shape of their own understanding. She said, "And you just did in 13 seconds what none of them could do in 13 years. He said, "They were treating the fear. I was not treating anything. I was changing the ratio. Your body was receiving more danger than safety. I reversed the ratio. That is not treatment. That is arithmetic." She almost laughed. Not the social laugh. Not the performance laugh. A real sound that started somewhere behind her sternum and made it halfway to her lips before she caught it and held it there, not suppressing it, holding it, the way a person holds a word they are not yet ready to release. She held the laugh for approximately 2 seconds. Then she let it go. It was short, 1.5 seconds, and it was quiet, and it was the first genuine sound she had made since arriving at the party. Bruce Lee heard the laugh the way a musician hears a note played in the correct key after hours of dissonance. He did not comment on it. He did not smile. He registered it and let it pass. She said, "What is the difference between what I do when I walk into that room and what you are telling me to do?" He said, "What you do is performance. What I am telling you to do is presence. Performance asks the room for something: applause, attention, approval. permission. Every time you walk through a door and produce the version of yourself they expect, you are asking the room to accept her, to validate her, to confirm that she is enough. That is a negotiation, and in every negotiation, the person who needs something from the other person is the person with less power. He paused. The quartet resumed. A new piece, not Gershwin this time, something slower, something Bruce Lee did not immediately recognize, a melody that moved in steps rather than leaps, patient, unhurried, the kind of music that does not chase the listener, but waits for the listener to arrive. He said, "Presence does not ask the room for anything. Presence arrives. The room adjusts to it. The room has no choice." When a person walks through a door without performing, without manufacturing, without asking for validation, the room encounters something it has no protocol for. Performance is expected, presence is not. And the thing the room cannot expect is the thing the room cannot control. That is power, not the power they write about in contracts, not the power that comes from a name on a marquee, the power that comes from walking through a door and requiring nothing from the people on the other side of it. Marilyn was quiet for approximately 10 seconds. 10 seconds of silence on a patio in Beverly Hills, between a woman who had been performing since she was 19 and a man who had been fighting since he was 13. The floating candles had burned down by approximately another quarter inch. The reflecting pool was dark except for the 3 small circles of warm light. The bougainvillea moved in the Santa Ana wind. The sound of the party inside was muted, continuous, a low hum of human activity that resembled white noise when listened to from the distance of the patio. She said, "You said we have the same problem from opposite directions. You prove them wrong, I prove them right. But what you just described, what you call presence, that solves my problem. How does it solve yours?" Bruce Lee said, "The same way. When I walk into a room full of men who see a small Chinese man, I have 2 choices. I can perform, I can demonstrate. I can break a board or throw a punch or do something spectacular that forces them to recalculate their assumptions. That works. It has always worked. But it works because I have given them what they understand. I have translated myself into their language. I have performed danger so they can recognize it. The other choice is to walk into the room and do nothing. Stand. Breathe. Be present. Let them look at 135 pounds of a body they have already dismissed, and let them feel, without being able to name it, that something about their dismissal is wrong, that the space I am occupying is not the space of a small man, that the air around me is different from the air around them. They cannot name it, they cannot point to it, but they feel it, and the feeling is more powerful than any demonstration because a demonstration can be explained and a feeling cannot. She said, "Have you done that? Walked into a room and done nothing?" He said, "Every room I walk into, I do not perform unless someone asks me to. And by the time they ask, they have already felt what I am describing. The request to perform is not a challenge, it is a confirmation. They felt something they could not name, and they are asking me to give it a name. The name is always the same: speed, power, technique. But the thing they felt before they asked is not speed or power or technique, it is presence. And presence is what remains when I leave the room. They forget the kick, they forget the punch. They do not forget the feeling of standing next to someone who required nothing from them." Marilyn turned her head toward the French doors. The party was still moving inside. The waiter was making another circuit with the silver tray. The woman in the green dress had moved from the far wall to the bar. The man in the grey suit was now talking to a different woman. The quartet played the slow piece she did not recognize. The room looked the same as it had looked 11 minutes ago when she walked out of it. Every element was in the same position. The chandelier, the glasses, the suits, the smiles that did not reach the eyes. Nothing had changed. She turned back to Bruce Lee. She said, "If I go back in, they will want the same thing they always want." He said, "Yes, they will." She said, "And the breath will not change them." He said, "The breath does not change them, the breath changes you. And when you change, the room does not know what to do with you." A room full of people who expect performance cannot process presence. You will walk in, and they will feel something shift, but they will not be able to name it. That is the advantage. When they cannot name what you are doing, they cannot take it from you. She looked at her hands one more time, steady. She looked at the champagne glass sitting on the stucco wall where she had set it 4 minutes ago. The champagne was flat now. The bubbles had stopped rising. The glass sat on the rough plaster surface in a small ring of condensation. Abandoned, unnecessary. The prop from a performance she was no longer giving. She took one breath. Inhale through her nose, 4 seconds. Hold, 2 seconds. Exhale through her mouth, 7 seconds. 13 seconds. Her shoulders settled, her chin leveled. Her weight moved to the balls of her feet. She walked toward the French doors. She paused with her right hand on the wrought iron door handle. The metal was cool. 61 degrees, approximately the same temperature as the water in the reflecting pool. She could see herself reflected in the glass, faintly, a white dress, and platinum hair, and 2 eyes that were looking directly ahead. Not down, not to the side, not scanning the room for the first pair of eyes that would find her. She was looking at the door itself, at the handle, at the threshold between the patio and the party, between the woman who had been trembling and the woman who was not. She said, without turning around, "What is your name again?" Bruce Lee said, "Bruce Lee." She said, "I will remember that." She opened the door and walked in,